It was a bright Saturday morning when James, a humble man in his late 30s, walked down the same street he had walked for years. He lived a simple life, working long hours, eating dinner alone, and spending quiet nights thinking about the father he lost many years ago. Nothing much changed in his routine except that one morning, something caught his eye. There it was, standing outside a small, dusty shop on the corner, an old bike, faded red with spots of rust and scratches along the metal frame. The sign hanging from the handle read, "For sale, $2,000. James stopped walking and stared at it for a long time. He couldn't understand why a bike that looked so old and broken would cost that much. The tires were flat, the seat was torn, and the handles looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Yet something about it drew him closer. The shop owner, a short old man with gray hair and thick glasses, came out and smiled. "You like it?" he asked. James nodded slowly. "It's beautiful, but it looks too old. Why is it $2,000? The shopkeeper looked at the bike, then back at James and said softly, "Because it's not just a bike, my friend. It has a story. A long one." James frowned a little. "What kind of story?" The old man only smiled again. "That's for the buyer to find out." He turned around and went back into his shop, leaving James standing there, curious and confused. James chuckled to himself. "A story? For $2,000? He whispered. He thought it was nonsense, yet he couldn't stop thinking about it. He stood there for a while, staring at the dusty seat, the old wheels, and the metal frame that looked older than him. He didn't know why, but something in his heart whispered that this bike was meant for him. It wasn't logic. It was feeling strong and strange. That night, James couldn't sleep. He kept seeing the bike in his mind. He remembered how his late father used to ride a bike everywhere when James was just a boy. His father's bike was red too, shiny and strong. James used to sit on the back and hold his father tightly as they went through quiet roads, laughing and talking. But that was before his father disappeared one stormy night and never came back. The next morning, James woke up early, still thinking about that old red bike. On his way to work, he stopped again at the shop. The bike was still there, waiting under the same sign. A man walking by noticed him and laughed. "Hey, James, you planning to buy that junk? You'd better save your money." James smiled weakly. "Maybe it's not junk." The man shook his head. $2,000 for that old thing? You could buy a car instead." But James didn't answer. Deep down, he knew this wasn't about money or logic. Something inside told him the bike was connected to his past, somehow to his father. Maybe it was crazy. Maybe it wasn't. He stepped inside the shop. The smell of oil and old metal filled the air. The shopkeeper was sitting behind the counter reading a newspaper. "I'll buy the bike," James said suddenly. The old man lowered his glasses and looked at him carefully. "Are you sure?" James nodded. "Yes, I'll take it." The shopkeeper smiled gently. "Then it's yours." James paid the money, his hands trembling a little as he handed over the cash. The old man wrapped the bike chain carefully and said, "Take good care of it. It once belonged to someone special." James frowned. "Someone special? Who?" But the man just smiled again and said, "You'll find out when the time is right." James wheeled the bike out of the shop. People on the street stared and whispered. "He paid $2,000 for that thing?" one woman said. Another man laughed loudly. "He's been tricked." James ignored them. He wasn't angry, not even embarrassed. As he walked the bike down the road, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. When he reached home, he set the bike in his small living room. The sunlight from the window touched the metal frame, making it glow faintly like it was alive. He sat on the floor and looked at it for a long time. The old bike didn't seem broken anymore. It looked proud, strong, and full of stories waiting to be told. He ran his fingers over the handlebar and felt a small engraving under the dust. Faint letters hidden by rust. He leaned closer to read them, but the light was dim. He decided to clean it up the next day. As night fell, James lay in bed, but his thoughts stayed with the bike. He wondered whose story it carried. He wondered why the shopkeeper called it special. But most of all, he wondered why the moment he saw it, his heart whispered his father's name. He closed his eyes slowly, and for the first time in many years, he dreamed of his father's laughter and the sound of a bike bell echoing down a sunny road. The next morning, James woke up earlier than usual. The sunlight was still soft through his window, painting golden lines across the room. He looked straight at the old bike standing in the corner, as if it had been waiting for him all night. Dust still clung to its frame, but there was something about it, something that pulled at his heart. He made himself a cup of coffee, sat beside the bike, and started cleaning it carefully. With every wipe of the cloth, more of the faded red paint began to shine through. It felt almost like he was bringing something back to life. As he polished the metal bar, his fingers brushed over a small mark near the handle. He leaned closer and saw 2 faint letters, LT. They were old and nearly hidden by rust. At first, he thought it might just be a scratch or part of the design. But then his heart began to beat faster. LT, he whispered. Those letters, he had seen them before. On a box, on a notebook, on a bicycle his father used to ride when James was a boy. His father's name was Louis Thompson. James froze for a moment. Could this really be connected to his father? It seemed impossible. His father had disappeared more than 20 years ago after an accident on the highway. The police never found him or his bike. It had been one of the most painful memories of James's life. He sat there staring at the letters, unable to move. His hands trembled slightly. Maybe it was just coincidence, he thought. Many people could have those initials. But another part of him, the quiet, hopeful part, whispered, "What if it's not?" James stood up and opened a small drawer in his cabinet. Inside was an old photograph of his father. He took it out, his eyes softening at the familiar smile. In the photo, his father was standing proudly next to his bike, a bright red one, shiny and strong. The seat, the handles, the frame, it all looked just like the one now sitting in James's living room. His breath caught. He couldn't look away. It can't be, he said quietly, but the words didn't sound sure. He placed the photo beside the bike. The more he looked, the more it made sense. The same curve on the handle. The same mark on the rear wheel. James felt a strange energy in the room, like the air itself remembered something. He touched the bike gently and whispered, "Dad?" The room stayed silent, but he could almost feel warmth spreading through his hands as if the bike was somehow answering him. He decided to keep cleaning, determined to find more clues. When he removed the torn leather seat cover, he noticed a small bump under the fabric. Curious, he pulled it open carefully. There, hidden deep under the cushion, was a tiny folded piece of paper, yellow with age. James's heart raced as he opened it slowly. The paper was fragile, and the handwriting was faded but still readable. It said, "To whoever finds this bike, know that it once belonged to a good man who gave everything to help others. He may be gone, but his kindness still rides with this machine." There was a date written below, June 14th, 2002. James's eyes filled with tears. That was the exact day his father had disappeared. He sat down on the floor, clutching the note, his mind spinning. All those years he had wondered what really happened that night. And now somehow this old bike had come back to him with a message, a silent voice from the past telling him there was still truth to uncover. James stayed there for hours, staring at the paper, the bike, and the photograph. His chest felt heavy but warm, as if part of the emptiness he had carried all these years had just begun to heal. That night, as rain began to fall outside, James couldn't stop thinking about the note. Who had written it? How did the bike end up at that shop? If it truly was his father's, then maybe someone out there knew what had happened. The sound of the rain mixed with his thoughts. He remembered being a little boy, waiting by the window for his dad to come home on rainy nights. His father always arrived soaked but smiling, ringing the bell of his red bike as he called out, "James, I'm home." He could almost hear it now, faint but real, the sound of a bike bell echoing through time. The next morning, James made a decision. He wasn't going to rest until he found out the truth. He took the note, placed it safely in a plastic cover, and packed his things. He didn't know where to start, but he knew he couldn't ignore the feeling in his heart. Before leaving, he stood in front of the bike once more. The morning sun made it glow softly, almost like it was smiling back at him. "I don't know what story you carry," James said quietly, "but I'll find it. I'll find the truth." And with that, he closed his door and stepped out, carrying hope for the first time in many years. The road ahead was uncertain, but something told him it was leading not just to answers, but to the part of himself he had long lost. The morning sun shone through James's window, lighting the red bike like a memory reborn. He hadn't slept much that night, but he didn't feel tired. His mind was filled with thoughts about the strange note and the initials LT that matched his father's name. The air in his small apartment felt alive, carrying both mystery and hope. He sat beside the bike again, the folded note in his hand. The paper was old, edges fragile, and the writing shaky but full of emotion. Every word felt heavy with meaning. He may be gone, but his kindness still rides with this machine. James whispered softly, "Dad, did someone write this for you?" His voice cracked slightly. It had been 20 years since he last spoke that name out loud. He ran his fingers over the handlebars, feeling the scratches and dents. Then something caught his eye. A tiny crack under the front light mount. It looked as if someone had forced something into it. He took a screwdriver from his drawer and carefully loosened the screws. Inside the hollow space, something metallic glimmered faintly. James pulled it out, a small rusted keychain shaped like a heart. On the back there were words engraved in faint letters, "To LT from M." His breath caught. His mother's name was Marilyn. It was now more than just a guess. This was indeed his father's bike. James sat down heavily, the keychain in his palm. Tears filled his eyes as memories flooded in. His father teaching him how to ride, the laughter, the sound of that same bike bell ringing down the quiet streets. He remembered his father's words. "A bike is not just metal, son. It carries your heart where your feet can't." He hadn't understood it then, but now he did. Still, a question burned inside him. How did this bike end up at a shop miles away from where his father disappeared? Who had written the note? He decided to trace the story. James started by visiting the old neighborhood where his father once lived. The streets had changed, new shops, new faces, but some things still felt the same. He stopped by an old gas station where his father used to work part-time. The owner, now gray-haired and slow-moving, recognized him immediately. "James? You're Lewis's boy, ain't you?" the old man said, surprised. "Yes, sir," James replied. "I'm trying to find out what really happened to him." The old man sighed and leaned on the counter. "Your father was a good man. Everyone liked him here. I remember that red bike of his. He used to ride it every morning. Then one day he never came back." "Do you know where the bike went?" James asked hopefully. The man shook his head. "No one does. After the police search ended, someone said they saw a broken red bike near the old bridge, but by the time they went to check, it was gone." James felt a chill. "The bridge?" he repeated. "Yes, the one near Riverside Road," the man continued. "It's been closed for years now. Too dangerous. But maybe you'll find something there." That evening, James rode a borrowed bicycle to the old bridge. The place was quiet, almost forgotten. The wooden planks creaked under his feet and the river below whispered softly. He looked around, searching for any sign that his father might have been there. Then something small caught his eye, a piece of metal half buried near the railing. He picked it up. It was an old nameplate, rusted and worn with faint letters, "Property of LT." He froze. His hands shook as he turned it over, realizing it once belonged to his father's original bike frame. He took a deep breath, the wind brushing against his face. Everything felt connected now, the initials, the note, the keychain, the nameplate. But still, he needed answers. The next day, James returned to the bike shop where he had bought the old red bike. The old shopkeeper was cleaning some tools behind the counter. "Sir," James said urgently, "I need to know where you got that bike from." The shopkeeper looked up slowly. "Why do you ask?" "Because it belonged to my father. He disappeared 20 years ago, and this bike, it's all I have left of him." The old man's eyes softened. He wiped his hands and said quietly, "I got that bike from a man who brought it to me 10 years ago. He said he found it near the bridge after a storm. He told me he couldn't keep it because it reminded him of someone he couldn't save." James leaned forward, his heart pounding. Someone he couldn't save? Who was he? The shopkeeper frowned, thinking. He was a mechanic, name was Howard. He worked at a garage near Hillview Street. Haven't seen him in years, but if he's still there, maybe he can tell you the rest. James thanked the old man and left, holding the note tighter in his pocket. That night he placed the bike gently beside his bed. The small keychain hung from the handlebar, swaying softly like a heartbeat. He sat quietly, staring at it as memories and questions filled his mind. He whispered, "Dad, if you can hear me, I'm getting closer." Outside, the night wind blew softly through the open window, brushing against the bike's bell. It rang faintly, just once, a quiet, gentle sound that made James smile through his tears. The truth was out there, and now he had a name, Howard, the mechanic. The journey to uncover the full story had just begun. The next morning, James woke up before the alarm. The sky was still pale and the city streets were quiet. He sat on the edge of his bed staring at the old red bike. It now felt less like a piece of metal and more like a bridge, connecting him to the father he had lost 2 decades ago. The note, the initials LT, the small heart-shaped keychain, and now the name Howard. Each clue felt like another piece of a puzzle that had waited years to be solved. James took a deep breath and said softly, "All right, Dad, let's find the truth." He got dressed, grabbed his bag, and left his apartment with determination in his eyes. His first stop was Hillview Street, where the old shopkeeper said the mechanic named Howard used to work. When James reached the area, it looked quiet and almost forgotten. Most of the buildings were run down, their signs faded and peeling. At the end of the street stood an old garage with a dusty board that read Howard's Auto Repairs. The place looked like it hadn't seen business in years, but the door was slightly open. James pushed it gently. Inside, the smell of oil and metal filled the air. Rusted car parts lay everywhere, and an old radio played soft jazz in the background. An elderly man sat behind a wooden table, his hands covered in grease. He looked up when he heard the door creak. His eyes, though old, were sharp. "Can I help you, son?" the man asked in a gravelly voice. James hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "Are you Mr. Howard?" The old man wiped his hands on a rag and nodded. "That's me. What can I do for you?" James took a deep breath and pulled out the old note he had found in the bike seat. "I think you might know something about this," he said, handing it over. Howard adjusted his glasses and read the faded words carefully. His hands trembled slightly. When he finished, he looked up at James with a stunned expression. Where did you find this?" "In a bike," James replied. "A red bike. I bought it from a shop downtown a few days ago. The shopkeeper said he got it from you years ago." Howard stared at him for a long time as if trying to read his soul. "What's your name, son?" James Thompson." The old man froze. His eyes widened. "Thompson? Did you say Thompson?" "Yes," James said softly. "My father was Louis Thompson. He went missing 20 years ago. The same man this bike once belonged to." For a few seconds, the garage was silent except for the faint sound of jazz playing on the radio. Howard's face turned pale. He slowly placed the note on the table and whispered, "I knew your father." James's heart skipped a beat. "You did?" Howard nodded. "Louis was a good man. The best mechanic I ever knew. He used to help me in this garage long ago. Always smiling, always talking about his little boy, about you." His voice broke slightly. He loved that bike more than anything. Said it reminded him of freedom. James swallowed hard. "What happened to him, Mr. Howard, please? I've spent my whole life wondering." Howard leaned back in his chair, eyes distant. "It was raining hard that night. Your father came to help me deliver car parts to the next town. Halfway across the old bridge, we saw a car crash. A woman trapped inside. The bridge was breaking, the river was high, but your father didn't think twice. He told me to stay back and ran straight to help her. He pulled the woman out just as the bridge gave way. The woman survived, but your father and his bike fell into the river." James's eyes filled with tears. He saved someone?" Howard nodded slowly. "Yes, I searched for him for days, but the river carried him away. The police found nothing. Later, when I found the bike washed up near the riverbank, I kept it. I couldn't throw it away. It felt like part of him was still in it." He paused, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "Years later, when I moved away, I sold the bike to that shop. I didn't think anyone would ever come looking for it." James sat quietly, trying to breathe through the wave of emotions. His heart felt heavy but also warm. His father hadn't just disappeared. He had died saving someone. Howard reached under the table and pulled out a small metal box, dusty and locked. "This was inside the bike's toolbox when I found it," he said, handing it to James. "I never opened it. I thought maybe one day if his family came looking, it should go to them." James accepted it with trembling hands. The box was old, with initials LT carved faintly on top. He looked up at Howard, his voice soft but full of emotion. "Thank you for keeping this." Howard smiled gently. "Your father was a hero, son. Don't ever forget that. He gave his life to save another. The world needs to remember men like him." James nodded, unable to speak. He stood up, shook the old man's hand, and walked out of the garage into the bright afternoon sun. As he held the small box close to his chest, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. The mystery of his father's disappearance was no longer a wound. It was a story of courage, love, and sacrifice. The truth had begun to reveal itself, but one question remained: what was inside the box? That night, James sat on the floor beside the old red bike. The box rested on his lap. The moment he opened it, he would uncover the last secret of his father's life. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking as he touched the lock. The journey wasn't over yet. It was only leading him to the heart of the truth he had been seeking for so long. James sat on the floor that night, staring at the small metal box he had brought from Mr. Howard's garage. It was old, rusted around the corners, and sealed with a small brass lock. The initials LT carved on the top glimmered faintly under the dim yellow light of his room. His heart was pounding. He could almost hear his father's voice in his head, gentle and calm, the way it used to sound when he read bedtime stories. He turned the box over in his hands again and again, afraid to open it, afraid of what memories it might bring. Finally, with a deep breath, he took a screwdriver and carefully forced the rusty lock open. The lid creaked as he lifted it, and a faint smell of oil and old paper filled the air. Inside lay a few small items: a black and white photo, a folded letter, and a tiny silver medal with the words "For bravery and service" engraved on it. James's eyes widened. His father had never told him about a medal. He picked up the photograph first. It showed his father standing proudly next to the red bike, the same bike now in James's living room, smiling with one arm around a little boy. That little boy was him, no more than 6 years old, grinning with missing front teeth. His father's eyes shone with pride, and James could almost feel that warmth again. Tears filled his eyes as he turned to the letter. It was folded neatly, and the paper had turned yellow with time. The handwriting was strong and familiar, his father's. James unfolded it slowly, reading each word out loud, his voice shaking. "My dear son, if you ever find this box, it means life has taken me somewhere I couldn't return from. But I want you to know, and I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I followed my heart, as I always told you to do. I built this bike with my own hands. Every screw and every chain carries a piece of me. It is not just a machine, James, it is my story, my spirit, and my love for you. If you found this bike, it means you never gave up searching. And that means I did something right as your father. Remember this: a good man is not known by what he owns, but by what he gives to others. With all my love, your dad, Lewis Thompson." The words blurred through James's tears. He held the letter close to his chest, feeling as if his father's arms were around him once more. After all these years of questions and pain, the truth had finally reached him, not through police reports or rumors, but through love carefully hidden inside a metal box. The small silver medal glimmered softly. On the back of it was engraved a date, June 14th, 2002, the same day his father disappeared. James realized then that his father must have been recognized for saving the woman that night. Someone had known about his bravery. The thought gave him an idea. Maybe that woman was still alive. Maybe she knew something about his father, something that could complete the story. The next morning, James went back to Mr. Howard's garage. The old man was sitting outside, sipping tea and reading a newspaper. When he saw James, he smiled. "Couldn't sleep, could you?" he said kindly. James shook his head and handed him the letter. "He wrote this for me. I found it in the box. But there's something else I need to know." "The woman my father saved, do you know who she was?" Howard's eyes softened. He nodded slowly. "Yes, I do. Her name was Margaret Hayes. She was a teacher from the nearby town. After the accident, she left flowers by the river every year on the same date. Said she owed her life to a man named Lewis Thompson." James felt his chest tighten. "Is she still alive?" "I believe so," Howard said thoughtfully. "She lives on the east side of town. Quiet lady. Maybe it's time she knows his son found the truth." James thanked him and left with determination. The walk to the east side was long, but the sun felt warm on his face, like his father was watching. When he reached the small white house with flowers growing along the fence, he knocked softly on the door. An elderly woman opened it. Her silver hair was tied neatly and her eyes were gentle but surprised. "Yes?" she asked kindly. "Ma'am," James began softly, "I'm sorry to bother you. My name is James Thompson. My father was Lewis Thompson." The woman froze, her hand trembling slightly. Tears welled in her eyes. "Louis Thompson," she whispered. He saved my life," James nodded. "I know. Mr. Howard told me everything. I found his bike and the letter he left behind. I thought you might want to see them." Margaret covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I never got to thank him," she said, her voice breaking. "Every year I prayed someone from his family would come. He was the bravest man I ever met." She invited James inside. They sat together, and she told him everything about that night. How his father had jumped into danger without thinking of himself. How he had pushed her out of harm's way just as the bridge gave way. "He smiled before he fell," she said softly. "That's something I'll never forget." James listened quietly, tears sliding down his face. "That's who he was," he said. "He always helped people." Before he left, Margaret handed him a small envelope. "I kept this for years," she said. Inside was a photograph of the rescue team holding the same red bike. At the bottom was a handwritten line, "In memory of Louis Thompson, a true hero." James walked home slowly, the envelope in his hand and his heart full. His father's story was no longer lost. It lived, in every life he touched, in every act of kindness, and in that old red bike that had carried his spirit home. James returned home that evening with Margaret's envelope and the small photograph of his father's heroic act. He placed the items on the table beside the old red bike, staring at them in silence. The room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of a wall clock. Every second seemed to echo the heartbeat of the past, connecting James to his father in a way he had never imagined possible. He sat down on the floor, holding the photograph in his hands. In it, his father smiled, strong, calm, and proud, next to the bike that had survived the river, just like his spirit had survived in James's heart. James felt tears streaming down his cheeks. He finally understood everything. His father's disappearance had not been a mystery. It had been a sacrifice. A selfless act that saved another person's life and left behind a story waiting for him to find. James picked up the letter again, reading the words aloud slowly. "A good man is not known by what he owns, but by what he gives to others." He paused and let the words sink in. His father had lived by this principle, and now James felt it in his chest, like a fire rekindled. All the anger, confusion, and sadness he had carried for years melted away, replaced by something new. Pride. Then James opened the small envelope Margaret had given him. Inside was another photograph, one he hadn't seen before. It was a picture of his father holding the rescued woman, Margaret, with the river behind them. There was a small handwritten note at the bottom. "Louis Thompson, bravery beyond measure." James realized that his father's story had reached other people, even strangers, and yet it had remained a secret to him until now. The bike, the note, the keychain, and Margaret's story had all been waiting for the right moment to be revealed. He leaned back against the wall, letting himself breathe. Everything finally made sense. The strange feeling he had felt when he first saw the bike, the pull in his heart, the initials LT, they had all been signs. Signs guiding him to the truth. James looked around the room at the bike gleaming faintly under the soft light. He ran his fingers over the frame and whispered softly, "Dad, I understand now. You didn't leave me. You were teaching me something even after you were gone." He remembered the stories his father used to tell him as a boy, about courage, kindness, and helping others without expecting anything in return. Now it was clear. His father's life had been full of meaning, and his death had not been in vain. The next morning, James decided to take the bike outside. He had spent enough time inside reliving memories. It was time to connect with the world his father had loved so much. He wheeled the bike to the nearby park, where the sun sparkled off the river, the same river that had once carried his father away. As he rode slowly along the path, he felt a sense of freedom that he had not known in years. Every turn of the pedals, every gentle ring of the bell seemed to carry his father's presence with him. James realized that the bike had been more than a vehicle. It was a bridge between past and present, a reminder that courage and love never truly fade. He stopped by the old bridge where Howard had told him the accident occurred. The wooden planks creaked under the weight of his footsteps, and he imagined his father running across them, saving a life without fear. James bent down and touched the railing, feeling a connection that was both physical and spiritual. He smiled through his tears. "I found you, Dad. I found your story, and I will carry it forward." That evening, James called Margaret. They spoke for hours, sharing memories of that night, stories of his father's kindness and how his courage had inspired so many people. Margaret's voice was soft but strong, filled with gratitude. She told James that she had kept the story alive for herself, visiting the river every year to honor him. Now she could finally rest knowing that his son had discovered the truth. James placed the letter, the photographs, and the medal back into the small metal box. He wrapped it carefully and set it on the bike's frame. "This stays with me," he said quietly. "So the world remembers him, and so I remember him every day." For the first time in years, James slept peacefully. The emptiness he had carried since his father's disappearance was gone. In its place was understanding, closure, and a profound connection to the man who had shaped his life even from beyond the river. The next morning, James decided to make the bike part of his daily life. He rode through the streets of his town, past people who glanced curiously at the shining old red bike. But James didn't care about their stares. Every turn of the wheel reminded him of his father's bravery, the kindness he had shown, and the lessons he had passed down without ever speaking a word. The truth had been revealed, and with it came peace. James finally knew his father's story, a story of heroism, love, and legacy. And as he rode on, he realized that he carried more than just the bike. He carried his father's spirit, courage, and heart with him, ready to inspire his own life and everyone he met. The morning sun rose slowly, spreading golden light across the quiet streets. James stood in his living room, hands resting on the old red bike. The metal gleamed faintly, polished and shining, reflecting not only sunlight but memories, stories, and the spirit of his father. He could feel it all in his chest, the courage, the kindness, and the sacrifice that had once saved a life. Today felt different. Today was more than a ride. It was a tribute, a way to honor his father and continue the legacy he had left behind. James had spent days piecing together the story, finding Howard, speaking to Margaret, reading the letter, and discovering the box of memories. Now it was time to bring the story to life in a way his father would have wanted. He stepped onto the bike carefully, the pedals smooth beneath his feet. As he started moving, the wind brushed against his face, carrying the soft smell of morning flowers. Every turn of the wheels reminded him of the boy he had once been, running beside his father's bike, holding tightly to the handlebars, laughing without a care in the world. The streets were quiet, and James rode past familiar places that had changed little over the years. The bakery where his father had once bought him a chocolate bun, the small park where they had spent summer evenings, the old gas station where Howard had worked. They were all part of the story now, part of a journey that connected the past and the present. As he reached the old bridge, the place where his father had saved Margaret so many years ago, James slowed down. He looked at the river below, its water sparkling in the sunlight, flowing steadily like life itself. The wooden planks creaked under his weight, just as they had that fateful night 2 decades ago. He imagined his father running across them, fearless and brave, carrying hope in every step. James stopped and placed his hands on the railing. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I see you, Dad. I understand now. Your story lives in me." When he opened his eyes, a feeling of calm and strength filled him. The bike was no longer just a bike. It was a symbol of courage, love, and hope. It carried memories that could no longer be forgotten. He continued riding, choosing paths that led to the places his father had once cared for. He rode past the hospital Margaret had worked at, remembering how his father had always believed in helping others. Children playing in the yard waved at him as he passed, and James smiled. Perhaps they could sense the love and pride he carried, even if they didn't know the story behind it. Along the way, James stopped at the small graveyard where his father had once been honored by the town. There was a simple plaque commemorating Louis Thompson, the man who had given everything to save a life. James leaned the bike against a tree and placed the medal from the box on the plaque. The sun reflected off the silver, sending tiny beams of light across the stone. He knelt and whispered softly, "I found the truth, Dad. Your bravery, your kindness. It wasn't lost. I promise to carry it forward." As he stood, James noticed something unexpected. Nearby, an old man was watching, smiling gently. It was Howard, the mechanic. He had come to see the boy who had finally found his father's story. "He would be proud of you, James," Howard said, his voice warm. "You've done what many couldn't. You followed the path, found the truth, and kept his spirit alive." James nodded, tears forming in his eyes. "I just want people to know what kind of man he was," he said. Howard patted his shoulder. "You're doing that now, son. One ride, one story, and it will reach everyone who needs to hear it." James mounted the bike again, feeling the wind brush against his face. He decided to ride through the town, stopping at familiar streets, waving at neighbors, and sharing small smiles. Every ring of the bike bell echoed like a message from the past. Courage matters, kindness matters, and love never disappears. By afternoon, James returned home, exhausted but fulfilled. The bike stood in the corner, gleaming like a treasure. He placed the letter, the photographs, the medal, and the keychain in a neat line beside it. Looking around the room, he realized that the journey had changed him. No longer was he just a man searching for answers. He had become a guardian of a legacy, a living reminder that one act of courage could echo through time. He felt his father's presence in the quiet of the room, in the gentle hum of the bike's bell, in the memories that had returned to him. That night, James sat by the window, watching the stars above. He thought about the boy he had been, the father he had lost, and the man he had become. The red bike, once an old forgotten object, had brought him more than memories. It had brought him closure, hope, and purpose. He whispered softly, "Thank you, Dad. I'll carry your story, your heart and your courage with me, every day." The night wind blew gently, rustling the trees outside. The sound reminded him of a distant bike bell, faint but clear, a signal from the past that some stories never end. They live on, inspiring those who follow. James finally lay down, a peaceful smile on his face. Tomorrow he would ride again, sharing the story, keeping the memory alive. But tonight he let himself rest, knowing he had found what he had been seeking all his life, the truth about his father, and the hope that comes when love and courage never fade.